Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my video review of the newest lens from Sigma. And this is a complement to the lens they released about a year ago in the form of the 28 to 70mm F2.8 DN lens. And that lens was essentially a lighter and cheaper way of getting kind of the normal zoom range without resorting to the larger, heavier, more expensive 24 to 70mm Art Series lens. So this is following up with that with a complement on the wide angle. And so it is a 16 to 28mm F2.8 DN lens in a very similar style and fashion to that 28 to 70mm. And much like that 28 to 70mm, it arrives having to face a well-established competitor from Tamron. In the case of the 28 to 70, it was the established 28 to 75mm f2.8 RXD lens, which has since been replaced by the new G2 version. And in this case, it comes up against Tamron's popular 17 to 28mm f2.8. One thing I will note right off the bat, though, is that Sigma does have at least one primary advantage, and that is it goes considerably wider. And if you look at this comparison, 16mm versus 17mm, the Sigma is very obviously wider in this scenario. What I also found interesting is that when I zoomed into 28mm in the same environment, the Sigma actually framed a little bit tighter than the Tamron. And so it's not just a little bit wider, it's also a little bit longer as well. So a byproduct of that is if you're looking to maximize your zoom range, this of course may be an interesting lens for you. However, everything is not completely rosy, as we're going to see as a part of our review. That extra bit of width does come with a few engineering challenges that Sigma has to overcome, and we'll examine how well they accomplish that in today's review. At the same time, however, I think this is a lens that is going to be attractive to some people who maybe don't have the budget to go to Sigma's excellent 14 to 24mm f2.8 Art DN lens, and they're looking to travel, smaller and lighter and still be able to use traditional screw-on filters, which this lens allows you to do, and the 14 to 24mm does not. And so we'll explore all the different aspects of performance and design just quickly after a word from our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by Phantom Wallet, the minimalist, modern wallet that sets you free from a bulky traditional wallet while also making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. Visit phantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber. You can even customize your wallet with new accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even the Chipolo tracking integration if you're the kind of person who loses their wallet. Use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out.
So while this lens, as noted, has a wider zoom range than what we saw on the Tamron, it manages to do so with only a modestly larger footprint. This is still a nicely compact lens for a full-frame wide-angle zoom with a constant maximum aperture of f2.8. In fact, it is 77.2mm in diameter, which gives us a common, not quite as common as 67mm, but a common 72mm front filter thread, and it is right over 100mm long. And so in both of those metrics, it's just a little bit larger than what the Tamron is, about 4mm more in diameter, but only about a millimeter longer. And it weighs in at 450 grams, which is about 30 grams heavier than what the Tamron is. At the same time, however, it is considerably lighter than other competitors like the Sony 16 to 35mm f2.8 G Master lens or Sigma's own 14 to 24mm f2.8, which is the heaviest of the group at right under 800 grams. And so you're talking about a significantly smaller package than what we see in those other settings. Much like what we saw on the other DN zooms that we've seen, this is falling under their contemporary rather than Art Series branding. And so as a byproduct, while it does have a gasket at the lens mount, it doesn't have necessarily any other internal weather seals. Though I will note in this case, this is a fully internally zooming and focusing lens. And so nothing is changing length here, nothing is moving in and out. As a byproduct of that, it probably will end up having a little bit better overall performance as far as sealing than what something like the 28 to 70mm did. And so in that case, I think that maybe helps us along. Bells and whistles are pretty slim on a lens like this. There is an AF/MF switch, which is something that the Tamron doesn't have, though I will note the Tamron does have a little bit better weather sealing as a part of its design. But what we do have, of course, because it's internally zooming, we have that just perfectly smooth zooming action that you really only see on internally zooming lenses. Also, the focus ring that is up near the front moves nice and smooth as well. The one thing I will criticize here is that Sigma persists on Sony with their lenses all zooming in the opposite direction of basically everything else that I test, be it first-party Sony lenses, Tamron lenses, even Samyang's own 24 to 70 millimeter. They all zoom in the same direction, from right to left, but Sigma persists in their zooms, zooming from left to right. And it's kind of odd that they persist in that, considering that they're developing for this platform where there is a consistent standard at this point. And so I will give them a little bit of criticism of that. This lens has a minimum focus distance of 25 centimeters, and it gives you a useful 0.178 times, right under 0.18 times magnification, which is good and just lags a little bit behind lenses like the G Master and the Tamron in terms of that performance. I will follow up with a kind of head-to-head versus video where I'll detail a little bit more between the Tamron and the Sigma, because there is some give and take, obviously, between those two lenses. So watch for that a little bit later on. Outside of that, 9 rounded aperture blades inside. Not a whole lot more to talk about as far as the build. This lens handles just fine. It does come with the lens hood and seems to get the job done. It is also equipped with Sigma's stepping motor. And I have found that Sigma has done a really good job, I think, on the Sony platform. I can remember back in the day where I had a lot of criticism for Sigma lenses when it came to their focus consistency back in the DSLR days. And I noted towards the latter few years of that era that they were making really positive strides in terms of autofocus accuracy and consistency. But on Sony, they've basically always done well. And the only place where I've really had any kind of criticism for Sigma's focus on Sony is that sometimes with the telephoto lenses, the focus speed isn't quite as fast as what I see with native Sony lenses that often employ multiple focus motors rather than just one motor. In this case, though, this one stepping motor is plenty. I found that when doing focus pulls, for example, focus pulls are really confident, smooth, strong, reasonably fast. No concerns there. I also found that the lens was nice and responsive when it came to doing the hand test to see how it returned to focusing on the eye. And you'll notice in this, there's no settling, there's no kind of lack of confidence. It just gets the job done. And that really was, I think, a fair evaluation of what I saw in general, and that focus results were strong and consistent. I got good eye detection when I needed that. I got good accurate focus on smaller and narrower depth of field shots, though again with a lens that has a maximum focal length of 28 millimeters and a maximum aperture of f2.8. You're only going to get so much shallow depth of field. It only focuses down to 25 centimeters. And so byproduct of that is that you're not going to have a lot of hugely defocused backgrounds and thus really narrow depth of field shots. And so, but focus got the job done, and I have zero complaints about what I saw in terms of focus performance. So a good job to Sigma on that. I think this is a lens that's going to work fine for you, whether you are wanting to do video work or stills or some hybrid combination of the two, like a lot of us. So how about the image quality? Let's dive in and see where the strengths and the weaknesses of this lens lie. It's not all perfectly rosy, though I think the overall picture is fairly positive. Let's dive in and take a look.
Now, while I'm testing a pre-release copy, as is usual with new Sigma releases, they made sure to send along a correction profile this time for the review, and it's a good thing that they did, because obviously this is a lens that it does rely on some digital correction to really get maximum potential out of it optically. So what we're going to see looking at the raw image without any kind of correction here on the left is that there is a significant amount of barrel distortion at 16 millimeters, and a significant amount of vignette as well. Now, if we take a look here on the right side, we can see that the profile does a fairly good job of cleaning all of that up, though I wouldn't necessarily call it perfect either, but certainly it's going to make a big improvement there. Now we can see if I try to manually correct it that there is a little bit of what we often call a mustache pattern in that it's non-linear. There's some waves that are left there. Even after correction, it took a significant amount, a plus 21, to try to correct for it. And you can see it's still not perfect as far as the lines after that. Vignette is also really heavy. I had to max out my sliders to eliminate the vignette here. And so certainly you're going to want to do some correction because that vignette is going to look very heavy otherwise. Case in point here, this is an uncorrected 16mm f2.8 shot, and as you can see, the vignette is very noticeable. Everything is darkened outside of the center of the frame. So the basic pattern that continues is in the middle of the range, we switch to, this is around 20 millimeters, we switch to a bit of pincushion distortion. Vignette is still heavy but lighter, and as we get to 28 millimeters, the pincushion distortion increases, though it is fairly linear, so it corrects okay. But we also see as the vignette gets lighter and lighter as you go throughout the zoom range. Now, just as a quick comparison between the Sigma at 16 millimeters and the Tamron at 17 millimeters, the Tamron also exhibits what we would call the mustache pattern there, and so that is a negative for the Tamron. However, what you're also going to see is that the amount of distortion is significantly lower than what we saw on the Sigma, as is the vignette, and so that's just an additional challenge of trying to keep a lens small and to take the focal length wider, as Sigma did. I've got very positive things to report, however, when it comes to the control of chromatic aberrations. We can see in this shot here that there's lots of potential for fringing in either this area or this area up here. We can see that there is no evidence of that fringing, and so the longitudinal chromatic aberrations are well controlled. And if we take a look at this image, it's got some bare branches up near the corners. We can see that in these transition areas where you would tend to see a lot of lateral chromatic aberrations, there's just not really any strong evidence of them there. So aberrations and fringing are well controlled. Now, in some cases, what we see when it comes to minimum focus distance is that there is one standard for the wide end and one for the telephoto end. A lot of those we've been seeing recently. That's not the case here. We have a fixed, and so you're going to get lower magnification at 16 millimeters than what you do at 28 millimeters, and we've discussed that. I did just want to show you here, zooming in though, that at either perspective, whether you're wide or at the telephoto end, you actually do have a really nice result up close. And so while the magnification is good, not necessarily exceptional, I think that the quality of the image, even at f2.8, is quite good. So all that aside, let's take a look at how the resolution and contrast holds up. This is 50 megapixels on the Sony Alpha 1 and at a 200% magnification, so we show off all the flaws. In the center of the frame, there really isn't any flaws at 16 millimeters. You can see that is very, very crisp, very high contrast, very strong performance. If we move off towards the mid frame, we see that while there is some drop off compared to the center, it looks quite good. And if we pop down here into the corner really looks fairly good as well. So a fairly strong performance at 16 millimeters all across the frame. Now, for the sake of comparison, I'll throw the Tamron into the mix. I will be doing a more detailed breakdown in a future video episode, but we'll just take a quick look here at 16 and 17 millimeters, which is where I think the two lenses probably compare the most favorably. And so you can see that in the center of the frame, both of them are very, very good. If we move off to the mid frame, we see that the Tamron gives us a little bit more contrast and detail. If we pop down into the corner, however, while the Tamron gives a little bit of a brighter image, you see as you get towards the very edge that the Sigma is maybe a little bit stronger. We'll pop over on this side. They look fairly similar. I would say that the Sigma looks a hair better towards the edge of the frame, and right off here towards the edge, it's give and take. I think that I would slightly favor the Tamron result over in this section. So the two lenses are very close at 16 millimeters f2.8. So if we start to stop the Sigma down here to f4, we can see that already in the middle of the frame, it was already so good. There's not a ton of room for improvement. I would say that there's a moderate amount more contrast there, but again, it was already excellent. Here in the mid frame, you definitely can see improved contrast in the mid frame, and popping down into the corner, you can also see some improvement there. Stopping on down to f5.6 just gives a generalized improvement to contrast here, and you can see that we've now got a really impressive result right off to the very edge of the frame. So definitely a great landscape aperture there. Now, minimum aperture throughout the zoom range here is f/22, but as per usual, I recommend avoiding that, particularly if you're on a high-resolution body. Anything beyond f/11, you're going to start to see diffraction quite obviously, and at the end of the range, you can just see how everything is really softened and kind of smeared by comparison to the wide-open result. Now at 18 millimeters, still a very strong result in the center of the frame. Stopping on down is only minor improvements because it's already excellent there. If we look at the mid frame, we can see that there's a little bit more improvement to be had in the mid frame and down into the corner when stopping it down. So that's the preferred for landscapes. But if you're shooting, in a typical composition in the center 2/3 of the frame and you want to get more shallow a depth of field, shooting at f/2.8 is going to give you good results. Now we can see as we stop on down, or we move on towards 20 millimeters, we can see that it's a little bit not quite as strong as far as the contrast in the middle part of the zoom range, and so stopping down is definitely going to give you your better result. Looking here, you can just see that it's just not as crisp as what we saw at the wider focal lengths, and that's an area where the Tamron maybe has a little bit of an edge later on. We see a similar pattern at 22 millimeters where it's just a little bit more obvious an improvement when stopping the lens down. Though I will note if I pan up here to the corner that it's a little bit softer in general, but it's a little bit more consistent across the frame. And by f/5.6, you can see that that's a really nice crisp result that is there when you stop the lens on down. At 24 millimeters, it's, I think, just even a hair softer here. And again, you're going to want to stop down to get the maximum performance. Again, same kind of pattern, though. The corners look, better kind of relative to the overall performance. It's consistent, but definitely improvement when you stop it on down. So for shooting landscapes, I would definitely recommend shooting at f/5.6, f/8 to get maximum results. And that pattern continues right on to 28 millimeters, where you can see once again that it's not a bad result, but it's not amazingly high contrast. You stop the lens down and you definitely start to see a stronger result. Though again, I'm relatively impressed with what I see in the corners where they look fairly good. Though once again, you're going to get your best performance, most consistent performance when you stop down a couple of stops to the f/5.6 range. So as always, I like to balance out the chart test with some real-world results. And so here's 16 millimeters f/5.6. Again, this is 50 megapixels of resolution. And you can see that as we look various places here in the frame, that it's just really nice and crisp, good results, right off close to the corners here. And so stopping the lens down and shooting in, at a more reasonable magnification of just 100%, things look quite good. So obviously a lens like this is not going to be a world beater when it comes to bokeh. You don't have an amazingly high magnification. But as you can see here, I think the geometry of the bokeh circles are good. You can see that everything looks, consistently round. What I do see is more outlining than what I would like, which results in a little bit busier backgrounds. Another case in point here where, again, the subject looks fine, detail is good there, but you can see that while everything is nice and circular, you just do see a lot of the outlining. And so in the cases where you don't have like nice circles and you have like bare branches, as we see here, it just tends towards a little bit more busyness, and as we transition towards defocus, it's just a little busier than what I would like. On the upside, I really do feel like Sigma lenses do produce nice color rendition, and that's certainly true here, where I felt like colors were, nicely saturated, nicely detailed, and the image looks good. Now, this shot is on the Sony a7 IV, and so you can see that, resolution looks, nice on this body, and the color looks very nice as well. Now, flare resistance is a little bit of a mixed bag. It really kind of depends on the composition. And so here with the sun, evening sun right in the frame, we got a little bit of ghosting and we got a little bit of veiling. That's wide open. If I stop it down, we get more defined long shafts of light, which you may like. I find that a little bit dominating in the image, and of course a little bit more obvious blobs here. And then zooming on in, we see similarly more veiling here with a little bit of ghosting artifacts. But if we stop down, you get these long shafts of light that you may love, you may not love, and it really depends on your taste. In other scenarios, however, where I was, just more shooting and less testing, I was happier with the results. We can see the sunburst effect through there. And in this shot, clearly defined shafts of light, but I find it a little bit more attractive in this particular shot. And we can see a little bit of ghosting artifacts, but nothing destructive. And in this shot, more at a typical f5.6 type aperture. The sun's right there in the frame, as you can see, and there is a little bit of ghosting and a little bit of kind of veiling through this area. But contrast held up fairly well, and it's still a very useful image. Finally, we'll take a look at the coma performance. And so in the center of the frame, obviously our star points are nice and round. If we move off towards the edges of the frame, we can see that there starts to be a little bit of stretching and deformation, but nothing too critical here. And so I would say that this is a lens that has some use for shooting the night sky, even though, obviously the maximum aperture of f2.8 isn't the widest that you could find at these focal lengths, but it still does a good job, and I felt looking at the images at large that they looked pretty good.
So obviously the big takeaways in terms of concerns is that the vignette and distortion are both on the heavy side, and particularly at the wider 16mm focal length. And as I noted earlier on in the review, that is one of the challenges that Sigma assumed when they decided to engineer all the way out to 16mm. And part of the reason why Tamron had early success in some of their lenses is that they were able to really perform at a high level, partly because Tamron, we'll call it, cut some corners, with their 17 to 28 millimeters. That's not a huge zoom range. It doesn't go incredibly wide. And so as a byproduct of that, they were able to engineer a lens with, less distortion and less vignette than what Sigma could accomplish here, and maybe even a hair more sharpness in some areas. Sigma chose to take on a little bit wider, a little bit more challenging a zoom range, and that does come with some engineering challenges. And in this case, some of those have to be overcome by using a profile, digital correction, because it's not going to be perfectly corrected in camera. But beyond that, they did do a really good job of correcting for chromatic aberrations of various kinds. They did a good job with, nice color, nice detail, fairly good flare resistance in most situations. And so overall, this is a lens I think that is going to get you very nice images. And of course, there are those of you that just prefer a Sigma lens, with a lot of good reasons. And if so, this is going to be a good match for other lenses that you may already have in your kit. So at the end of the day, while the price hasn't been fully settled at the time of this review, it seems to me that it's probably going to be somewhere in the $999 USD range. And at that price point, obviously it is a few $100s higher than what Tamron is offering at this point. But again, it does give you a bigger zoom range, and most importantly, the ability to have a wider angle of view, which may make all the difference in the world for you. So I do think that there's going to be a market for this lens, not just on Sony E-mount, which is where I tend to focus because it's what I know, but I also know that Sigma has a whole other market on the Leica L mount. And very likely the competition there is less varied and more expensive. And so I think that's also a platform that'll make a lot of sense. This lens will make a lot of sense for potential buyers. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full text review and also my image gallery if you want to look at more photos. There are buying links there, but again, this is a lens that is just being, on the day that I'm releasing this video, is the day it's being announced. Byproduct of that is it's going to take a few weeks for some of these listings to populate, and of course it's going to be more of a pre-order stage until the actual stock starts to get to market, probably in about a month. Beyond that, you can follow myself or Craig on social media and check out our new channel, Let the Light In TV. There's also linkage there to get channel merchandise or to become a patron. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.